What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Jack Ramsays. Danny Marang here on a Tuesday night. Quick apology for not doing the podcast I had planned on doing last week. If you've listened to the radio show over the last year or two, I've been dealing with some vertigo, and it's what I was dealing with last week coming out of the All-Star break. So I basically grabbed a hold of a pillow and held on tight in my bed for a couple of days. Ruined me pretty good, but we're back here, back on schedule. Like, rate, review, subscribe, do all of the things as we do to help grow the show. Mailbag show, but also we'll dive into the discourse from last night. There's it's not in Scoot versus Shaedon. I think it's the way I would categorize it is it's the development paths of both, and kind of how we're forgetting what we just saw Scoot Henderson go through, and how it worked for him. And not every player has the same buttons that you push, but there's we'll dive into it when we dive into it. But I want to make sure I get to your guys' questions here first. And again, as always, like, rate, review, share the show, share it with your friends. It's dog day in a sense, post All-Star break for a team. I know they're talking about playing. The math really isn't there. They're also not playing exclusively the kids. So I know people are getting frustrated and feeling irritated or feeling a certain sort of way. Shane, the flow is elite. I appreciate that. I finally got trimmed the other day, and I'm really liking the fake mullet haircut we got going on here. So, but I want to make sure we dive into your questions and kind of get into what are they doing? What are they doing? They obviously being the Trailblazers. First question from Anton Smith. Our probable drafting spot is 8th through 12th in the draft. We haven't seen this front office trade for higher draft position, but do you think they could break tradition and trade into the top 4 picks? I don't think that's something that they or anyone else is probably looking at. The value of those guys gets exponentially higher each spot up you go. I guess if somebody really talked themselves into it and they were going to give up a lot to get in there, I could see it. But I think with the way teams are prioritizing rookie scale contracts, second round contracts, I think it's a very different supposition as far as like what you expect to see from front offices and how they manage those things. The instance I could see is, and even then these are rare, the whole like 1 back to 2 or 2 back to 3 or 4 up to 3. I think those, I think everyone's leery after Markelle Fultz, after Trae Young. Like when you get pillars of your team in Tatum and Luka Doncic, who's currently flamethrowing his former Mavs teammates right now. I think going back to Portland, Tyrese Thomas and Victor Kriapa for LaMarcus Aldridge. I think front offices in general are pretty leery of both the team to move out of that spot and the team kind of moving into that spot because of trading up for a guy. If that guy doesn't hit, you expended capital on in addition to what you use to draft said player. So I'm not going to say it's impossible. I don't think this front office operates like that. I don't. That's just not something like, you can talk about, in 22 when there was, exploratory trade talks about the Blazers trading the 7th pick to Toronto, where teams were, chasing after the number 3 pick last year in Scoot's draft, but nothing ever came to fruition. So again, I don't think it fits really in the current financial / team building cycle that not even the Blazers are in, but the NBA in general is in. But I get the question. I think you see it happen much more in the NFL. I think the bigger piece of that is because of how many more players there are and how many more rounds and how many more things you can work with. It's you see those things there and not so much here where, the premium value of the top, one pick and then 2, 3, 4, and then from then on out. But yeah, I think that's kind of where things sit. Rip City Dad, who on the current team has the highest ceiling is most likely to become an all-star? If we don't get that dude in the draft, who's the best chance to become that, or do we have to trade to get that guy? On the current roster, talent and potential, and then slot to get there, I'm probably going to go outside the box here. I'm not going to say Scoot or Shaedon or Danny or even two. I'm going to go with Donovan Clingan. And the reason I'm going to do that is the way that is kind of handled with positionality. I think at his peak, Donovan's profile has him as a incredibly impactful defender. Gobert-esque, as it were. If the Wembys of the world didn't exist, and again, you're talking about Donovan hitting like his 90th plus percentile output, right? But with that, let me pull this up. This always makes for a great podcast, is when I pull something up live. I was talking about this two nights ago on the postgame show. And they're like, again, these are all kind of signs more than anything else. Donovan Clingan right now, okay, his offense is severely behind as far as like, and not even severely behind in expectation. It's severely behind as far as like how limited he is, right? But that's not why he was drafted. He was drafted for his defense and his rebounding. Now, even though he's played 700 minutes and he's not playing 28 plus minutes a night, and that's, a discussion for another day, what he is doing right now in his time, okay, his block percentage is in the 99th percentile at 4.7%. Okay, it's 16 minutes a night. The only players that are in front of him are Chet Holmgren and Victor Wembanyama. Okay. His offensive rebound rate, and I'm reading these off of Cleaning the Glass, so it takes some of the garbage time stuff out of that. His offensive rebound rate is 16%. It is the 99th percentile. The only players in front of him are Day'Ron Sharpe and Steven Adams. Like, those are elite markers, right? Eats everything up and deters everything around the rim. Is one of the best offensive rebounders in the entire NBA. His defensive rebounding rate right now is in the 79th percentile. Very good. Not the best, but very good. Right now, he's sandwiched between Nikola Vucevic and Charles Bassey, ahead of Alperen Şengün, and just behind Walker Kessler and Kevon Looney. Like, he's a very, very, very good rebounder. He's an elite offensive rebounder. And he's an elite keep the ball alive, tip it out to somebody else guy, right? It's easier to make that All-Star team if you were a dominant big man. And dominant big man has different connotations. There's Nikola Jokic. There's, I'd say Sabonis, but he's been snubbed. Rudy Gobert. Like, there's a pathway to that level of success, right? And I think the most likely guy currently on the roster, because making all-star teams in the West at guard, forget when Steph and Dame retire and you're going to cycle more guys in. Like, the guys that are at that position, it's just bonkers. Like, making all-stars a guard, you were basically an all-NBA caliber kind of guy in the West. It's just, it is a bloodbath. And it's the same thing at the wing spot, right? So whether you characterize Shaedon as a guard or a wing, or like Tumani, if you're saying like the biggest dark horse, like if he does, I shared this on social media the other day, the trend line mark of estimated box plus minus from dunks and threes. of Tumani through game. I think he's at like game 130, 140 right now. He's on a very, very, very similar trajectory to Jimmy Butler. The difference is he's 2 years older than Jimmy Butler was. So if you adjust the curves for age, it starts obviously later. But like those are, if he continues that trend line and let's say his handle drastically improves, very unlikely. But it's say that it does. I'm going Donovan way, way, way up here. And this is in proportion to his teammates, not just like likelihood of making it. Like it's Donovan doing it still be a dark horse, but Donovan way up here, then a pretty significant drop, and then 2 or Denny, give or take. Then Shaedon on talent, but I'd give Scoot the edge in the other stuff. And I think the way, unless you're Damian Lillard, the way you make an all-star team as a Portland Trailblazer is playing on a very good team while putting up crazy numbers. I don't see Scoot or Shaedon doing that, right? Like if you think about all-stars in Portland's history, there's not a lot of them. Now the guys that did make it made it pretty often. You know, that's your Clydes, your Dames, your LaMarcuses, right? But this organization has always had a lot of, when they've been their best, a lot of really good players, if not all-star caliber players. And I think part of that is the market. And even though things have changed in the NBA and things are different, as far as like branding and not having to play in the biggest market. I mean, look at Oklahoma City. Look at Cleveland. Cleveland obviously is a different dynamic because it's in the East. But yeah, I think that's kind of where you're at. And I don't know how many people would agree with that, but like if you're looking at profile alone, when you talk about all-stars, you talk about guys that are the best at kind of what they do, right? Well, Donovan Clingan is right there at the very tippy top in block rate, offensive rebound rate, very good in defensive rebound rate, like the things that he's asked to do. If he gets remotely useful, like in an average to above average capacity, let's say he gets to 14 a game. 14 a game. Like doesn't have to be a crazy number. If he's like a 14 and 15 guy with like 3 blocks while being like a defensive player of the year candidate, yeah, that's exactly how Rudy Gobert did it. And I think that's probably the most likely pathway. But I think the guys you're talking about when you're talking about all-star caliber guy, I think you're probably more generally thinking about like your lead guy. Because Donovan, Rudy, those guys aren't your lead guys. Hell, Chet's not your lead guy. Evan Mobley, still not the lead guy in Cleveland, even though he's been unlocked and they're doing more with him. He's still got, maybe more to go. And even then, it's hard to be the lead guy or hard to make that all-star jump unless you're Jokic, Embiid, like those kinds of bigs, right? Şengün, because you're just kind of filling the stat sheet. But if you're a specialist that's special, then I think you have a capacity to kind of make it up there. If you're talking about the lead guy in Portland, I think they're either looking to find that guy in the draft or they're looking to trade for that guy. That's where I kind of would look at that. Waffles asks, obviously anything can happen in the lottery, but considering the likely odds, it looks grim as far as like getting the a number 1 overall pick or top 4. At what point do we really start worrying about purgatory? The role players developing is great, but creates a higher floor going forward and eliminates premium draft picks. I understand what people are saying in this, but Portland fans, you went through actual purgatory with Damian Lillard. You had a general manager who would not make the move necessary to be truly competitive. That, to me, is purgatory. Being stuck in the 8th through 12th worst team in the league, or 22nd through 20th, 18th, that's not purgatory to me. Because if you take a look over the history of the NBA, even though, yes, and unequivocally 100% being towards the top of the draft is better mathematically, gives you better odds. There's no doubt about it. You can't hitch your wagon to 8th, 9th, 10th, 12th overall picks on the regular. But the flip side of that is, you're still getting high-end talent, and those guys can hit. Jalen Williams, SGA, like, it doesn't have to be a number 1 overall pick. It doesn't have to be a number 2 overall pick. It sure as hell helps. It absolutely does. It absolutely does. But the idea of what that looks like as opposed to being here, I think are vastly, vastly different things. You're still in the beginnings of this. The guys that you've invested in at picks 7, 3, and 7 are in years 3, 2, and 1. 2's in year 2. Denny's in year 5 in the NBA. Your team is still incredibly young. Like nobody's even in their prime yet, outside of Anthony. As far as like guys that are like on the roster right now that you're like talking about, and DeAndre, because DeAndre's hurt, but like that's a different spot. Scott me in the comments says Purgatory is 8th seed every year. Agree, but what do you call the Kings for the last 15 years? Making the wrong mistake in the draft over and over and over and over and over again. The draft is a crapshoot, man. I was taking a look at this the other night. I was debating kind of the merits and like where we think guys are versus where they actually are, development cycles, all those kind of things as it pertains to the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th picks in that draft. Jaden Ivey, Ben Mathurin, Shaedon Sharpe, Dyson Daniels. And again, just kind of throwing them up on the EPM graph and going like, Dyson Daniels is the only one that is clearly like outperforming the other 3 guys. And Ivy probably would be in that group if not for the injury, right? But he was, even then, he came from further behind and started to take off this year. But it's funny when you look at it, when you see it smoothed out over games played, they're all almost in the same range. Like it's like, I think people tend to forget what development looks like and how long it takes in it, because you see a Wemby or you see an SGA now at 25, and you're like, and you forget what those first couple of years were like. Or a Jalen Williams pops a little bit earlier than everybody expects, and you're like, oh my god, and he was like, well, yeah, he did play 3 years in college. Like, it starts to make sense because guys are a little bit older, they have a little bit more experience, but also some guys just take longer. See Tumani Kamara, and I think that those are the things, like everybody's development path and arc and the speed and rate in which they figure things out or don't figure things out is very different. But yeah, I don't think this is like a dire situation at all. Like that's ultimately where I fall in this stuff. Now, like, if they spend 5-6 years like just biting the concrete on pick after pick, like Marvin Bagley, like that hurts. I mean, the last generation for the Blazers, Zach Collins. You could have taken damn near anybody else in that range, and that team and the franchise would have been exponentially better off. And that's part of it. Like, I mean, I'm not going to relitigate that stuff. I didn't like the pick when they made it. I didn't like the pick at all. That's nothing against Zach. It's just, it never, ever made any sense to me. But, I mean, what if they take, Bam? What if they take Donovan? What if they take OG? What if they take Jared Allen? Like, the what ifs there are long, right? It also illustrates how difficult the draft is and, like, what the expectations kind of are on guys and how those things kind of unfold. But it's a good question in the sense of, like, at least establishing what purgatory is, at least for me. I mean, I've seen plenty of fans keep saying that they're heading towards purgatory, and I'm just like, no, not yet. They aren't even good enough for purgatory yet. Like, that's the thing. From Jeff Workman, a couple things I've been pondering and really interested in your opinion. Is Anthony Simons on the opening day roster next season? Is a future backcourt of Tumani and Scoot out of the question? I think Shaedon ultimately finds his way, but could this be possible? The Ant part of this, I don't know. I think Ant is definitely open to a move, for sure. I mean, Yusuf Nurkic is out here tampering, trying to get him to Orlando. I've had multiple people reach out to me over All-Star break and ask why the Magic didn't push harder for Ant. And my answer is a shrug. I don't work in Orlando, man. Like, we all can see kind of what Orlando needs, and I think there's probably some hesitance from them. And this is a theory that I've batted around for a while now, and I mentioned on the radio. I might have mentioned on the podcast. I think the Blazers are a team that mostly deals in the summer, particularly like on like making bigger transactions. I think they like having that time period. But as far as him being on the roster, I'd say it's unlikely, but I wouldn't rule it out of the question. I just wouldn't. Like, I know that the team values Ant. Like, period, point blank. They value Anthony Simons. 100%. But I think that'll become a little bit more clear once we get past the lottery. And then obviously once we get to draft day and free agency, and kind of, I think that's where stuff's probably going to happen if it does. And I think you just kind of want to know the variables going into that situation. Is a future backcourt of Tumani and Scoot out of the question? It's not out of the question. I'd say it's unlikely. Again, you're talking about if two would have to turn into like a Jimmy Butler light, I think, in order for that to work. Again, probably pretty unlikely. But if you have two guys with very real physical tools, two guys have that, the dog in them per 36 is not questioned. And I think that's probably the biggest question with Shaedon. It's certainly not talent. So, but is it out of the question? No. Is it unlikely? I'd say yes. But if two does, figure this thing out and start putting together like Jimmy Butler, then you start having real questions for sure. There's no doubt about it. But I think Shaedon ultimately finds his way because this will be possible. Yeah, it's like, I don't think it's in the box, as it were, of like the likely possibilities. Beyond that, Shelvin Kumar in the comments says, did you address folks talking about Sharp being on the trade block? Please ease my heart. I've not heard anything about Shaedon being on the trade block. Like, I don't, and I've seen people say that Chauncey's going to run Shaedon Sharp out of town. And I remember, I said this on the radio earlier today. The idea that a coach can't be hard on a player without a player going, trade me. And this is not directed at Shaedon and at all. But if that was Shaedon's mentality, I would want the Blazers to get rid of him. If you can't be questioned, if you can't be tested, if you can't be asked to do more, to deliver more, to care more, to have more aggressiveness, to have more fire, to have more intensity, I don't want you here. Like, I don't look at you as a building block. Like, that whole thing to me is just such a, it doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Like, at all. And again, I'm not saying that Shaedon is that. I'm saying if that was the actual thing where he turtled up and said, I want to be gone, then pack his stuff for him. That's where I am with that stuff. Like, one thing that Dame told me years ago that always, I know I've mentioned it a bunch of times. We were talking about just like player types and development and kind of like how you become upper echelon player. And we talked for a long time, and he kind of stopped and goes, look, man, I'm not the most talented player. I never have been, but I knew what it took to work to be great in the NBA, or to be good in the NBA. And when I got here, I figured out what it took to be great. And those were two different things. But he did come in with, I mean, you remember the license to Lillard pre-draft stuff and like all the workout stuff he was doing. And it's not saying you can't work out without putting it on tape. Like, that's neither here nor there. But nobody ever questioned whether Damian Lillard wanted it. That's just never been the case. And his work rate is maniacal. Like, on and off the court. Like, when he goes and does like an All-Star weekend, he's got his handler with him, he's got his agent with him, his business manager with him. and they're going from like it's a tight schedule. I've got to do this, I've got to do this, got to do this, got to do this. Like that dude, when it's time to go, he goes. I can't even count the number of times after a game we would talk, texting back and forth 2-3 in the morning about his minutes, like with things that we're talking about. Like, and this was like a very normal thing. Like when he got home, he would go home and watch his minutes. And like he just didn't stop. He's a basketball sicko. He just wouldn't be outworked. And like that's not common in the NBA. And I think fans think that every single player is like that. It's really not. Don't get me wrong, guys work hard, but there is a sliding scale of how hard guys work in the NBA. And it's not a 1-to-1 ratio of like how hard you work versus like how good you are. Like I've mentioned this a bunch of times before. Ryan Repair is an absolute psychopath as far as work. He is in the gym all the time. Work, always working with his trainer. He's a guy that he lives, breathes, eats, sleep basketball, right? It's like that's the thing where I'm just like, if he's gonna figure like that's part of the reason why I kind of like wink and nod and I do the French sickos meme and stuff like that, because I appreciate that. And the likelihood of somebody like him or a prospect like him putting it together is significantly stronger than someone who's maybe just a little bit more talented but has nowhere near the work rate. I've almost taken a step back in my prospect evaluation where if you go back and hear me talk about drafts over the last 8, 9, 10 years, more often than not, I've said some version of like, just give me the talent, let me figure it out. And as I've gotten older and as I've been around more guys and as I've talked to players, like I'm starting to adjust that a little bit. And this is maybe hinting at the in-person scouting piece that I'm working on right now with Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper when I went and saw him at Rutgers. This is not a anti-Ace Bailey rant that I'm going to go on, but I think it kind of illustrates the point. At least when I'm talking about dynamics of roster building. Watching Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey warm up. Dylan Harper, son of Ron Harper, a longtime NBA pro. Watching him warm up, he smiled, he joked with his teammates, he was singing along to the music played, but there was a plan. He was locked in. He was focused. He was going through his routine. He was making sure everything he needed to be done was done at game speed, and just little stupid intrinsic things like that. And when I watched Ace, and it was very similar at Hoop Summit. Ace is a very fun-loving, like energetic, bounce around the gym, always having fun kind of guy, which I think is a good thing. It's not a lack of professionalism. It's a lack of truly knowing, in my opinion, what it takes to lock in and be ready. Night in, night out. And he's still a kid. He can figure it out. But I was talking to an evaluator last week. And I was like, hey, man, I got a question for you. Because it was pertaining to Shaedon. And I go, when you see a kid like Shaedon, who has all this potential, and he gets moved to the bench for the defense and the focus and the intensity, and a lot of people question his mentality. How many guys in the NBA do you know of that had the talent up here, but some of the intrinsic, some of the intangible stuff wasn't matching that? How many guys match those things? And what he told me was, not often, Danny. He goes, I just don't. It's something you don't worry about, but it's definitely something you always consider and you always think about, and you always kind of go, there's more there. It's this, and I'm still, like, as you can tell here, like I'm still kind of wrestling with it because I am a guy that believes in top end talent. Holy, like when it's there, it's there. But I'll use another Canadian as an illustration. The idea of like Andrew Wiggins as a prospect was, this guy's going to be good. But there's also the idea that Andrew Wiggins did not and has not cared enough. He's been a very good pro, title winner, all-star. Like most guys don't ever reach those accolades. But I think if you had asked both Timberwolves and Warriors fans how they feel about Andrew Wiggins, is that he has never lived up to what he could have been. But I also think that's probably most prospects in the NBA. That's just something there where you're just like, yeah, no, I get it. And Sheldon brings up a player in the comments that I have probably higher on my draft board because of those intrinsic things, because of those intangible. VJ Edgecombe. Because VJ Edgecombe attending Formula Zero camp as a high profile guy makes me trust him to figure it out. Elite athlete and work ethic and humility. VJ Edgecombe at Hoop Summit was an absolute demon. And I think that's a perfect cross between Shaedon and VJ, right? Shaedon to me is a more talented player. Like the stuff that he can do, I think he has a higher ceiling, particularly on the offensive end. Defensively, I think VJ's got him by quite a bit. But I was listening to Rafael Barlow, NBA Big Board, on the way home tonight, and they were talking about VJ. And this is kind of the thing that I've thought about him and kind of comping him to Victor Oladipo. And it's not just the athletic profile; it's just like the stuff that he does, right? Whereas with VJ Edgecombe and Depot, like, you got additional defensive value, but also on nights when shots aren't going or the offense isn't really there, like fully there, how else are they going to impact the game? And more often than not, when I see Shaedon's night, I'm left going, you could do more. Like, he's not a high steals guy, he's not a high blocks guy, but like, you kind of like, I know there's more there. And that's more the idea of Shaedon. And again, we're saying all this stuff, and I think the fan base is getting feeling a certain way about Shaedon, not because he's not good enough. Because if he wasn't good enough, it'd be, it's kind of like the Travis Outlaw thing, where it was like, oh, back then, the idea of like Travis can do so much more, and I was like, but can he? I think Nick Batum's probably a better example, because everybody always wanted more out of Nick, because Nick was more skilled, and Nick has said he wishes he would have figured some things out sooner. And I think if you ask a lot of veterans in the NBA, the thing that they'll say is like, I wish I would have known X sooner. I wish I would have known Y sooner. I wish I would have known, I wish I would have been more willing to accept this coaching or this role or this veteran, or like, because when you're young, you know everything. And I know if you gave me $10 million a year at 19, 20, 21 years old, I would have been out of pocket. I would have been wildly irresponsible. Like the way these guys handle themselves for the most part, both on and off the floor, I would have been so much worse. So much worse. Good Lord. But like that's, I think like the totality of that, of like, I think people care about Shaedon not because he's not good enough, but because he could be. But maybe that's me. I don't know. That's at least the way that I read it, because when I write about him, when I talk about him, I don't say this because I don't like the kid. I don't say this because I think he's a bust or he's a bum or that he's not good enough. I say these things like because he is. Because the talent is there. Like he can. Dame told me his rookie year, not Dame's rookie year, Shaedon's rookie year. He goes, he can just do stuff, man, that other guys can't. And like that, when a first ballot Hall of Famer in his prime is like, okay, yeah, no, he can go. You tend to notice that kind of stuff, right? And this was like right out of the gate. This is coming into training camp. Or coming out of training camp. It was like, oh, we need to pay that. You knew kind of the profile, even though he was like this guy that nobody really knew was mysterious because he, came out of the COVID development cycle and then didn't play at Kentucky. Dame had a couple weeks with him, and he was like, yeah. And I will say this: Dame's actually he's got a pretty good eye for talent. Like he knew right away that Ant had the goods as a scorer. Like he after playing against two, he was like, no, he's got it. Like this was, and that's the thing is like, Sheldon points out, Dame said 19-year-old Sharp is way ahead of Dame at 19. And that's the thing is if you've ever heard Dame talk about his relationship with Phil Beckner, I think Phil said this, so I think it's safe to say now. Dame early in his career at Weber State was like, I'm made it. I'm here. And Beckner basically was like, you ain't it, man. You're nothing. You haven't made it. And Phil was like, I'm not even going to work with you anymore. Like, because you don't have what it takes to be the guy to really push through. And then Dame was like, no, I do. And Phil basically challenged him and said, prove it. And they've been, linked ever since. And I think that, that's the thing you always have to remember is that Shea didn't go play at Kentucky that year. That was a lost year. And you can say he worked at the gym and he worked with his trainer Francis and all those things. But he lost a year of live game action. And then last year he lost 50 games basically of live game action. Of playing the game. And I know some people are like, that's why he needs minutes. They're trying to make sure that he gets the right minutes with the right mindset because he already lost that time. That's the thing that I want to drive home to people. Thank you. Phil did tell that story when I did the interview with him. I thought so. I know Phil and I have talked about that particular instance in time, so I was pretty sure that was okay. But I think that's kind of the thing that I'm sitting to watch is I can tell you whole cloth with 100% certainty. The organization wants Shaedon to reach up and snatch his role with both hands. He wants him to grab it by the neck. That is what they are trying to pull out of him. Because they know that he has the talent. Whether it's the front office or the coaching staff. They're on the same wavelength as far as belief in him, but they want him to go grab it. And I mentioned this earlier on the radio. For all people who are they're going to break Shaedon, he's going to do this and he's going to do that. We literally just went through this with Scoot Henderson. And look where Scoot is at now. And again, not every player is the same, and you can't use the same methods with everybody else, but I think they've tried other stuff with Shaedon. They've tried to kind of give him the reins and try to give him those opportunities. They did this with Tumani Kamara. Last year, Tu got taken out of the starting lineup, despite being as good as he was defensively last year, because he got outside the boundaries of what his responsibilities were, and he got a little too big for his britches early on. He kind of he believed some of his own hype, and he tried to skip some steps. And Tu has been very honest and open about that. He goes, I had a really good conversation with Chauncey. This was last year about what I need to do and how I need to do it, and I respect him, and I'm going to do that. And Tu went out and did it. He grabbed that thing just grabbed that role by the neck, and look where he's at now. He's very, very, very likely going to be an all-defensive team member. That is the Blazers as a team, as a front office, as an organization. You can see the types of players and what they are trying to do with guys. And this is for all of the people who said I was a Chauncey supporter and caring. This is the stuff that I was talking about in the sense of, look, are Chauncey's X's and O's perfect? No. Is he the best coach in the NBA? No. But I know he has the respect of those players. I know that he has very real, open, and honest communication with those players as far as expectations and roles and what he thinks they can get to and where they can get to and how they get there. Because when he says he's been in their position, he has. As a number 3 overall pick that got traded very early in his career, that a guy that kind of lost his way early in his career who also snatched it and rose to the heights of now a Hall of Famer. He's been basically everywhere. He's been on the bench. He's been a starter. He's been an all-star. He's been an all-NBA. He's been a journeyman at the end of his career. He's seen it all. And he is an incredibly effective communicator with those guys. So I know it's a long rant to get down, but that's been so much of the discourse over the last 36 hours. Oh boy, this is going. My 2 cents, my podcast. That's where I go. Trade du jour. If you were rebuilding this team, would you take the same approach as Joe? Specifically with Scoot, has he earned a starter role over anyone? His minutes are fine now, but still think he could use more. The reason why you don't hear me criticize Joe in the front office all the time like I did Neil is, number 1, with where the team is at. Number 2, and I've been open and honest about this, I think on the whole, what they have done have been the right moves. And you can quibble over trading Ant or trading Jeremy or trading DeAndre or trading X, Y, or Z. The stylistic team that they are trying to build, bigger, longer, stronger, more defensive focused, defensive minded, grittier, nastier team, is what I wanted the Blazers to do with Dame. There's a lot of tape back on the old Blazers Edge podcast. Go back and revisit it. I haven't changed my tune on that because stylistically, those are the kind of players that I like. And that's how I would build a team. So, would I take the exact same approach as Joe? Probably not. But also, there's also the implications of guidance from above and financial stuff and organizational goals, ticket sales, and there's a lot of other stuff that feeds into this. And there's agents and players and always trying to get this, that, and the other. It's not as clean as I think people would make it out to be. And that's not to make an excuse for Joe. I just think there's a lot more stuff that goes into that than just the roster building. The roster building stuff, don't get me wrong, that's fun. But all the other stuff that you manage on the day-to-day, I remember the first time I ever heard all of the stuff that a general manager actually has to deal with. I was like, I don't ever want that job. I want to build a roster. But if you listen to Bob Myers has said this recently, there's another GM that said this recently. The roster building stuff, the lead up, all this stuff, this is fun. It's when you're in the thick of it and you're competing at the very top, that's when it becomes the toughest. That's when it becomes the toughest, when the pressure gets on and one single move can break you. Do I make this move now? Because if we make this move, we can't make any others. Or it will severely limit us in making X move, Y move, those kind of things, right? That's the thing that every front office person I've ever talked to is that's when it, don't get me wrong, it's fun, but it's also exhausting. Because it becomes these dire stakes, right? At least in the basketball world. But I don't think Scoot has earned a starter role just yet. I think he's definitely getting there. He's playing 28 minutes a night. I know people he needs to be playing 32, 34. I don't care about those minutes. You don't have to play 34 minutes a night. If you're going out there and you're being productive, there's nobody on the Memphis Grizzlies right now that's playing above 28 minutes, I believe, still. And I know they're deeper and they're a better team and all those kind of things. Donovan Mitchell said this 2 weeks ago, of the idea of a couple years ago, I wouldn't have been willing or able to step back a little bit and let somebody like Evan Mobley have more opportunity because I cared about my stats, I cared about my numbers, and players won't really readily admit this stuff publicly, but they absolutely care about their numbers. You will see players in the locker room grab the box score and first thing they look at is minutes and shots. How many minutes did I get? How many shots did I get? How many minutes did I get? How many shots did I get? Because you're just being Hassan Whiteside's agent basically told Hassan before he got his big deal with the Miami Heat, right? Was go out there and grab every rebound, block every shot, dunk every single thing. Make your box score so ridiculous that they can't know that somebody has to offer you. Because that's what ends up happening. It's the production is so overwhelming in a sense that it can't be ignored, even if the context is completely different. If you remember the Hassan Whiteside days, Hassan was basically chasing every single shot in Portland, trying to block it. It wasn't good defense. It was chasing shot blocks, And again, if you gave a very high level defensive IQ player's brain and put it in Hassan Whiteside, his freakish body and athleticism, would have been an all-world player. But he just didn't have the acumen to be that guy. And the counter to that, and why you'll hear some players push back is, a perfect example is the normal Blazers starting center and DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton was asked to, give up his numbers, be a team guy, anchor the defense, concentrate on the intangibles and the intrinsic stuff more, and we'll take care of you. On the financial side, he does. The Phoenix Suns get to the finals, but it takes an RFA match offer from the Indiana Pacers before they live up to that expectation. Well, his numbers are down, and this, that, and the other. It's like that kind of stuff it's very dicey with that stuff, and you do have to be careful with it to an extent. But I think if you're going to use minutes as the carrot, as it's been done with Scoot and Shaedon and Tumani, like the stick also has to be present, at least for me. Because that to me is kind of what they're using. But again, as far as like Scoot earning a starting role, I don't think he's quite there yet, but he's definitely trending that way. Over his last 30 games, and this is the sample that I wanted to see kind of last year. It was like, give me 20 games of like sustained production. And you can have an off night in there, but like play up here for a longer period of time. He has absolutely done that. The other night against the Jazz, he has 6 turnovers, but he's got 17 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds. And like you can see things being worked out better. His feel was better. His understanding was better. Even when he was making mistakes, you could understand at least the process. And the mistakes that he was making was like being over aggressive, driving a little bit too deep, waiting a beat too long to make a pass, or trying to it was more exploratory as opposed to just, what are you doing? Which for a 40 or 50 game stretch of Scoot's career was a nightly occurrence. So the growth has been substantial. And I think that's the thing when you get to those guys, as far as like the team building and understanding and trying to figure those things out, that's what's I think is pretty impressive. And then kind of following up on this, Competit says, or asks, with Scoot's emergence, has he moved himself into the 2 Denny category? If so, does this impact who we draft? Would a Scoot Harper backcourt work? Like if you're saying if the Blazers move up to 2, if the Blazers thought Dylan Harper was the best prospect available, I think they would take him, regardless of, I think even regardless of Scoot was like a starter capable guard. Because I think Dylan Harper's probably a guy who could play the 1 or the 2 in the NBA. Big frame, every bit of 6'5", solid kid. He's not the burstiest. His body type kind of reminds me a lot of Brandon Roy, in the sense of like, you look at him and you're like, he's certainly an athlete. He's not, Shaedon, vertical burst, but his body control, his strength, his ability to stop, start, change directions, to go either way, go left, go right, like just very fluid hips, light on his feet, could split double teams. Like there's just different types of athleticism. Like, the Luka Doncic type athleticism, where just because he can't jump 40 inches in the air and tomahawk everything doesn't mean he's not an athlete. So I think Dylan is a guy who could probably end up playing the 2. He's got the size at least for it, but that's the answer at least to your second part of your question. Has he moved himself in the 2 or Denny category? I don't think yet, but he's trending that way. Like if you read the article that I did, if you haven't, patreon.com/Jack Ramsays, 5,203 words. Good Lord. Make sure your legs don't fall asleep on the toilet when you're reading. But I don't think that the Blazers are in a spot where if they thought a better talent was on the board, that they could draft under that spot for fit, particularly if they're picking in the top 2 or 3. Like, I just don't think that's the case. But, I would love that to be a problem for the Blazers, because that means Scoot is well on his way. If that's becoming, the thing. At least that's where I sit with it now. Rob Blaze, hey Danny, you often say that nothing really matters much until we land a first option type player. I do, and I believe that. Given we're unlikely to have a high pick in this draft, probably not. Do you think our front office had any plans to try and acquire that type of player besides hoping to strike gold with the 10th pick? Yeah, I do. I think that that's something we often gloss over, in the sense of like what the mechanisms are for adding to this team. Free agency, that's for filling out the rest of the roster. Portland's never going to be a player in free agency. It's just not going to be the case. I think you've got to find a way to get some guys at least, through free agency, and not always that being like the scrap heap. But yeah, they executed the Denny trade kind of out of nowhere. I've said this, multiple times. The Blazers and the Wizards had long discussions last trade deadline. Couldn't come close to a deal, but said, let's revisit this summer. And, after the lottery, and they know where that pick falls, and they kind of know where everything sits at. And again, it's just a big reason why, feeding into, I think the Blazers like to do their research and kind of conduct some business at the trade deadline, even if it doesn't come to finality, so that it can be revisited again, and there's frameworks. And you hear this not only from this front office, but front offices around the league. Like, a lot of these deals end up coming about because of, previous discussions. So, yeah, I do. I think they would consider what if the Blazers pick 8th or 9th and package that with whatever players or another pick on top of that. And they can do some stuff. I'm not saying that they will, but they've shown if they identify a guy that they think is the guy, or a guy like Denny, that they will expend that capital. And I think that's something you very much have to very much consider when you're talking about this summer in particular, because of where they are roster-wise. Very much so. Unless somehow they, move them in the top 2 in the lottery. Because if you do that, then you're definitely not trading that pick. Well, if you are, you're going after somebody pretty damn big, right? So, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. DJ Wilson asks, what's the timeline on Tease? I feel like most fans forgot how impactful he was when he was on the floor. He's a defensive menace. I mean, he's a specialist. He has been ramping up. He's been doing some, I believe, light 3-on-3. When I talked to Tease before All-Star break, he was definitely feeling better. Obviously, he hasn't returned since that point in time. But I think that's one of those situations where I think he could possibly make his return at the end of this trip or when the Blazers get back. That's kind of what it sounds like the way things are going. But because the ankle injury was so bad, I've seen some people like, oh, no, the Blazers just shut him down. Why would they shut down the 10th or 11th guy on the roster? That doesn't make any sense at all. I know it's fun to put on the tinfoil. Trust me, I get it. I still have the tinfoil hat over in the corner with Sprague and I. But, no. Tease rolled the living hell out of his ankle. He was going to return the next game from that knee injury. And I've talked to players and coaches. He turned that thing sideways. It was not good. And when you get an ankle injury that's very severe, I mean, I've said this on the radio, so I know it's okay to say. With Tease, he flat out told me, he thinks the doctor suggested to him it might have almost been better for him to have broken his ankle. That was the severity of the sprain. It wasn't a grade 3, clearly, because he didn't tear it all the way. But boy, did he come close, it sounds like. It's boy, that has to suck. He has ramped up, and he's doing stuff. I don't think he's doing full 5-on-5, and the Blazers generally, as a rule, make you go through a contact practice before return to play. But I could definitely see him coming back at the end of this trip. If not, they have the one home game before going out on the road to Golden State? ? I think that's the case. So, and then Elliot, which is the perfect timing on this. Have any of the Blazers read any good books recently? The number one guy to ask about that is Matisse. Matisse always has something with him. And when I see him with that book in his hand, I always ask him, what are you reading? What are you reading? And it's always something incredibly interesting. Matisse, there are very, very few guys that are more interesting and engaging to talk to about non-basketball stuff than Tease and Jeremy. They just have very, very, very different and unique takes, likes and interests, and it's they're some of the most fun guys to talk to about non-basketball stuff. But I haven't seen Tease with a book lately because when you're injured, your pregame stuff is a little bit different. Usually when the locker room's open to us, he's probably going through treatment. Every now and then I get to catch him. But it's a different world when you're injured, unfortunately. But he's 100% the guy that you ask as far as what interesting books, or read any books. It's Tease. So next time I see him, I'll see what he's reading because he's always got something. Reach Has there ever been an NBA team that lost by 45 or more points and won by 45 or more points in the same season? Yes, your Portland Trailblazers. The Jazz had a bad loss this year? Because they beat the Blazers by 42, so I guess it wasn't 45. I'm sure it's happened. 82 games is a lot, man. You can have stuff go sideways, both good and bad. But I think it's probably happened before. Because even good teams have had their soul snatched from them and then, done something the rest of the season. You go out you get that weekend trip, that Friday, Saturday, Sunday trip to either Los Angeles or to Miami or to New York. And maybe you go out on the town that night. Nightlife in those cities is undefeated. Atlanta's also on that short list. If you ever get into NBA gambling, there's certainly some flex pricing, as it were, as it pertains to those markets on Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. It's built in. So, and Josh asked a question that we already got into, but assuming you get a late lottery pick and you see the Blazers package that pick and veterans to get the next Denny, yeah, I very much can. Very much I can. Bryce asks, did the Portland make a mistake by not moving Grant and Ant over the summer? Their respective seasons have not helped their value, I'm sure, especially Grant. I go back and forth on whether or not it's helped or hurt their value. Jeremy's obviously had his worst 2-point season. Basically as a pro, I don't know why he can't hit anything outside of the rim. All of a sudden, it's very weird. Is that father time? Is it an anomaly? Is there something else there? I don't know. He's probably taken a dent to his value in a sense, but his 3-point shooting is still okay, even after some bad games. And not even that. It's been not a great season for Jeremy. Ant's value, I think Ant is kind of what he is, in a sense. So I don't think it's necessarily taking a dent. But as far as did they make a mistake, we'll know this summer. That's, I think, what you'll know is if one and or both are here going into next season, then yeah, they did make a mistake. And if you are going to move on from either of them, you're probably going to have to take less than you expected or less than you wanted. Nature of the game. I'm not there yet. I think that this summer is 100% that point, though. So, I think that's all of the questions. There's a couple others that are Sprague. I'm not answering yours, you monster. But beyond that, I think that's most of our questions, and we're hitting an hour right now. So we'll wrap it up there. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you. We'll be back on these. Donovan is supposed to join next week. Knock on wood. Every time we've tried to have him, he's had something come up. So, but the hope is, I'll give you guys kind of the rundown. The hope is to have Donovan and then either two or Denny in the next couple weeks. I'm trying to iron those out. Obviously, none of those guys have been on the show, so I really like doing those because I feel like having them on here for longer and just kind of BS with them, you guys get a chance to get to know those guys a little bit better, and almost talk to them like I get to talk to them, away from the court and away from the cameras. I've said this before, like this team it's just a lot of good dudes, and I want to kind of share that with you guys and let you guys get to, submit some questions and have a little bit of interaction with those guys. It's fun. So, like, rate, review, subscribe, do all of the things. I appreciate you for being here. Patreon.com/Jack Ramsays. The Scoot Henderson article is there. It's very long. I am working on a couple very long pieces on Denny and on, I'm going to do Donovan's probably before the end of the season, but I wanted to give him as many games as I could to kind of see where that stuff goes. That's the current plan. I've got some smaller stuff. I'm probably going to, I'm debating on putting it up there free for everybody, but a lot of work goes into that stuff. So that's why it's behind the paywall. But I might do some smaller stuff, and the film session is going to start back up now that I've got my feet back under me. So Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful night. You can find me on social media at Danny Marang, at dmarang on Instagram, over on Blue Sky as well. I use an app to cross post to both, but I try to check over there at least somewhat regularly. Audience over there is just still smaller, so when I'm on one platform or the other, it's usually more time on Twitter. Every day, noon to 3, Danny and Dusty on 1080 The Fan. And then post game on Rip City Wrap Up on K2 2.2 Charge with Joe and Tyree. And hopefully we will be having some player interactions there as well, following up in the post game stuff. We've got some fun stuff planned on Wrap Up. So everybody have a wonderful night. Take care. Talk soon.